Assalamu alaikum, this is Rutarana, roll number 17402. I'm going to talk about two references, The Golden Bow and Fleur de Mal. The Golden Bow was written by James Frazer, and it is basically an anthropological study of various cultures and religions throughout human history. And since it is non-fiction, it doesn't have major characters, and its themes are basically how various human societies perceive death and how cultures are different and similar. Now, if we are to see the text through the lens of Frazer, then the vegetation ritual, which is referenced in the lines 70 to 75, can be looked at. In this, we can say that one of the deathly inhabitants of the unreal city stops another character, which is Stetson, and inquires a few things. This is a reference to the Adonai section of the Golden Bow, where Frazer explains the ancient practice of planting a corpse or a constructed statue, a human figure that represents God, so that out of the corpse, new life, vegetation, crops would grow. However, if you look at this monologue, you can see that there is uncertainty, there is confusion whether the planted corpse would bloom, since it has already been a year, and there are a lot of external interventions, like it is mentioned that a sudden frost might have disturbed its bed, or a dog might dig it up again. So you see that Eliot is associating the decay, sterility of war with the blighted land of modernity, and that this wasteland is basically just devoid of any hope of regeneration, because there are too many different disturbances, and modernity has taken position and has corrupted the nation to its roots, plus the aftermath of war is dominant. Now I will talk about reference to Baudelaire's Fleurs de Mal, which translates into Flowers of Evil. Basically, it was written in 1857, and it's a poetry collection, and it doesn't have major characters either, since it's a poetry work, and it deals with degeneration and eroticism. Now, there are two references to this French poetry collection. First comes from The Seven Old Men, which is an indirect reference and basically is about the visionary similarities between the 19th century Paris and the 20th century London, and the imagery which shows the city's pollution, obscurity, are all very similar to Paris's description in the book. The fog there is yellow, and here in this poem is brown, and it shows that both the writers equally dislike industrialization and how humanity seems to be dead in the modern unreal cities. Second is the direct reference to Fleur de Mal section, O Lecteur, which can be seen in the last line of this section. You hypocrite reader, my fellow, my brother. So it just reflects the general evil nature of humanity, and even the poet is calling his readers hypocrite, as well as his fellows and brothers. So in conclusion, Burial of the Dead just summarizes the death of humanity, nature, cultures, and just like Eliot's time, the 19th century France was pretty much indulgent in similar sexual practices and luxury lifestyles. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. My name is Aruba Salim. My roll number is 17414, and the part that was assigned to me by you is Preface to Fleur de Mal by Charles Baudelaire. Now, first of all, to begin with, this reference is relevant to the last stanza of The Burial of the Dead. And in that last stanza, this reference is repeated twice almost. And the first part, which is to be covered for this class, includes this reference in the form of unreal city. Now, this unreal city is basically referring to Eliot's London, and this unreal city is Eliot's version of a poem which was composed by Charles Baudelaire, and the name of the poem was The Seven Old Men. Now, Fleur de Mal was basically the collection of the poems published in 1857, which included this poem, The Seven Old Men. Now, the poem begins with the line, Formilante Cité. Now, this Formilante Cité is basically Unreal City. It is the French for Unreal City. And the line goes on to say, Unreal City, city full of dreams, where ghosts in broad daylight cling to passers-by. Now, this poem was basically written for the contemporary Paris. How filthy, how full of vices and errors and human faults, and particularly lust and avarice and all sorts of obnoxious sensual activities were being practiced in a filthy and morally deprived society of Paris at that time. Now, this has been adopted by Eliot, and the unreal city which he is referring to is, of course, his London, the contemporary London, or in a broader sense, it could be taken as an extended or a wider metaphor for the wasteland, which is basically the modern world. Now, we see here that the rest of these references which are present in this stanza, they would make more sense when discussion on them would be generated in the next class. But for now, this unreal city is basically how a speaker, which in my personal perspective and according to Eliot himself, is Tiresias. Now, Tiresias is basically the man who is bridging antiquity with so he is bridging antiquity, classical antiquity, with the modern world. So, in the Seven Old Men, the speaker is basically disgusted by what he sees in Paris. Like, he is absolutely horrified and he's depressed by whatever he's seeing around him in the filth-ridden city. And similar would be the case, as we would observe in the rest of the stanza, that Tiresias, or whoever speaker we would want to consider, he is being disgusted with what he's seeing around him. He sees vices, errors, and envy, and all sorts of illegitimate sexual practices and lust, particularly covetousness and avarice. So it is quite an amalgamation of particularly heinous and deadly sins which he is seeing in front of him in this unreal city. And another reason why I think the reference from Fleur de Mal might have been adopted by Eliot is because this collection of poems, Fleur de Mal, it's basically a very, very important contributor of the 19th century symbolist movements and the modernist movements as well. And of course, it is also contributing largely to the decadence and eroticism which was prevalent in that literature, and of course the literary movement of decadence. So these two are very important themes which have been discussed in the preface to this collection of poems as well. So Eliot is taking that concept of unreal city, which was for Paris, and he's using the same disgusted and outrageous and a disappointed tone for the contemporary London which he is observing around him, which is basically the modern day wasteland.